What would happen if every display and electronic system on a billion-dollar warship suddenly went black while it was moving through one of the most dangerous waterways on the planet? Picture a sailor standing on the bridge of a destroyer. The GPS system is no longer reliable. The radio is transmitting incorrect coordinates. Ahead lies a narrow passage barely 20 meters across, and none of the instruments designed to keep the ship safe can be trusted. This was not just a theoretical scenario, it happened. American warships were placed in a situation where their most important electronic systems became unreliable, while the people behind the operation watched from a small island nearby. For 11 consecutive days, United States naval vessels traveling through the Strait of Hormuz experienced a disturbing series of failures. Their electronic systems stopped functioning properly. The disruption was not random, and it was not accidental. GPS signals were interfered with. Navigation systems showed incorrect information. Communication equipment detected false channels that were not real. These warships, each worth billions of dollars, were suddenly operating with limited awareness while passing through one of the busiest maritime routes in the world. Every vessel entering the strait faced the same problem, and every vessel leaving it was left trying to understand what had happened. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the worst places on Earth to lose navigation capability. It is a narrow water corridor located between Iran and Oman. At its narrowest point, the safe passage used by ships is only a few miles wide. Every day, enormous oil tankers, commercial cargo ships, fishing vessels, and military ships move through this crowded route. They pass through the waterway like vehicles crossing a single-lane bridge. A small mistake, a wrong calculation, or a sudden course change could cause a collision. Hundreds of sailors could be placed in danger, and a single accident could create an international crisis. Now imagine adding a warship with unreliable navigation into that environment. A vessel unsure of its true position, a radar system showing inaccurate information. The situation could quickly become catastrophic. American intelligence agencies realized something unusual was happening almost immediately. The pattern was too consistent to be explained as normal interference. For 11 days, every ship experienced the same problems in the same region. Someone was creating the disruption intentionally. Analysts from the National Security Agency and the Defense Intelligence Agency began investigating. Satellites were redirected to observe the area. Signal intelligence teams searched for the source of the interference. Electronic warfare specialists examined the patterns, studying the signals to determine what type of equipment could produce such effects. The answer gradually became clear. A strong electronic signal was being transmitted from one specific location. Its purpose was to interfere with the frequencies used by American navigation and communication systems. This was not accidental background interference. It was an electronic weapon. The signal led investigators to a small island called Lark Island. The island sits near the entrance of the Strait of Hormuz, positioned in a location that allows it to affect ships moving through the waterway. It was like a control point capable of stopping traffic on a major highway. The island represented the key position, and someone had installed equipment there to exploit it. When analysts examined satellite images of Lark Island, they discovered a facility matching their expectations. There were antenna arrays installed on buildings, power generators operating continuously, and satellite dishes directed toward the sky. This was not a simple coastal station. It was not a fishing location. It was a specially constructed electronic warfare facility. And, according to the investigation, it belonged to Iran. The next question was what action should be taken. The situation was complicated. The island was Iranian territory. Civilians could potentially be nearby. Any military strike would create major political consequences. An air attack would immediately attract global attention and could escalate the situation far beyond electronic interference. But waiting was also dangerous. Every additional day of jamming increased the risk to American ships. A confused destroyer could accidentally strike a civilian vessel. A navigation mistake could send a warship towards shallow water or into the path of an oil tanker carrying 2 million barrels of crude oil. The longer the disruption continued, the greater the possibility of a serious accident. And an incident in those waters could trigger consequences that nobody wanted. The response needed to be accurate, rapid, and limited. It had to happen before the situation became a larger conflict. The mission was assigned to the 22nd Marine Expeditionary Unit. The 22nd MEU is one of the most capable rapid response forces in the world. Its Marines train repeatedly for operations involving small targets, hostile locations, and limited time. Their objective was clear: reach the target before anyone could react, complete the mission, leave before daylight. They had carried out similar operations in other regions under different circumstances. Now they were preparing for a nighttime mission on a small Iranian island. The operation plan was aggressive. MV-22 Osprey aircraft would transport the Marines from their amphibious assault ship to Lark Island. The Osprey is a unique aircraft. It can rise vertically like a helicopter, then rotate its engines forward and continue flying like an airplane. It is fast, capable of operating in difficult areas, and able to land where traditional aircraft may not be able to. For this mission, as the Ospreys would fly low above the water, using darkness and surrounding terrain to reduce the chance of detection by Iranian radar. The objective was the rooftop of the electronic jamming facility. The plan was simple. The Marines would land directly on top of the building, move through the structure, destroy every electronic warfare system inside, return to the Ospreys, and leave before Iran could organize any serious response. The Marines repeated the operation again and again during training. They analyzed aerial images of the target. They created replicas of the interior using intelligence information. They practiced clearing rooms until every action became automatic. Every Marine knew his place in the formation. Every Marine knew which room he would enter. Every Marine knew the positions of the men beside him. There would be no room for mistakes. They understood they would only have one opportunity. But there was one thing the Marines did not know. Someone on the island had already started preparing for their arrival. His name was Colonel Reza Shirazi. He was a senior commander in Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. He was not an office worker writing reports from Tehran. He was a battlefield officer with years of experience, a commander who understood that caution and suspicion could save lives. And during the days before the operation, he noticed changes. American surveillance aircraft had been operating near the edge of visible range. Satellite activity over the island had increased. Messages from his commanders in Tehran had become more urgent and more frequent. Colonel Shirazi could not confirm an attack was coming. But decades of military experience told him that the Americans were not simply observing, they were preparing. So he made a decision. He moved his forces inside the facility. Before that, most of his troops had been living in barracks outside the main structure. That arrangement was normal, but it also meant the building itself had limited protection. Shirazi changed the entire setup overnight. He ordered all soldiers into the compound. Ammunition was placed throughout the floors. Guards were positioned at stairways, hallways, and entrances. The jamming facility was transformed into a defensive position. Then he waited. The Ospreys launched at 3 or 0 in the morning. There were no lights. There was no radio communication, only the sound of rotors moving through the darkness above the Gulf waters. Inside the aircraft, the Marines sat quietly. Some closed their eyes. Some reviewed their assignments one final time. Others thought about home, about the people waiting for them, and about why they had chosen to wear the uniform. Lark Island appeared ahead as a dark shape against the slightly brighter water. The compound came into view. The antennas on the roof reached upward like thin shadows against the night sky. The Osprey slowed, dropped altitude, and landed hard on the rooftop. The impact shook the aircraft and sent dust moving across the surface. The ramps opened. The Marines rushed out into the darkness, and almost immediately, the operation changed. Iranian troops were already waiting on the roof. Gunfire erupted. Flashes from weapons illuminated the darkness. Bullets struck concrete and metal around the Marines. Voices in Farsi mixed with commands in English. The first 30 seconds became a violent struggle. The Marines moved quickly for cover behind rooftop equipment. Their response was immediate. Find the threat. Fire back. Move forward. Communicate. The training took over. The rooftop was secured in less than 2 minutes. Those 2 minutes felt much longer. But the rooftop was only the first step. The real battle was inside the building. Moving downward meant entering an unfamiliar environment. The stairways were narrow and dark. Every doorway could hide an enemy. Every corner could become an ambush point. The Marines advanced in pairs. One covered while another moved. Positions were taken one at a time. Each room was searched. Each hallway was checked. On every level, Iranian fighters were waiting. The third floor became a brutal close-range fight. The rooms were small. The distance between enemies was minimal. It was the kind of combat where soldiers could hear each other's breathing. A Marine squad leader was hit in the shoulder and went down. A young sergeant immediately moved forward, stepped into command, and continued the mission without hesitation. There was no time to stop. The second floor was even more difficult. Iranian forces had used the large electronic equipment racks as protection. Metal cabinets and server towers created barriers strong enough to absorb incoming fire. The firefight on that level continued for 6 minutes. In modern combat, 6 minutes can feel endless. Every moment mattered. Every round fired carried consequences. The Marines used grenades to remove fortified positions. They moved through smoke and dust with weapons ready, searching for threats. Eventually, the floor was secured. But then they discovered a problem that had not been part of the original plan: the explosives. The mission depended on placing timed charges on the jamming equipment before leaving. It was supposed to be straightforward. Place the explosives. Exit the building. Allow the charges to destroy the system. But during the fighting, the demolition team suffered casualties. Equipment bags were lost during the chaos. Somewhere between the rooftop and the second floor, the demolition charges were gone. Without those explosives, the mission could not be completed. The jamming equipment was still operating. The system was still sending signals. American ships were still being affected in the strait. Inside the room, the Marines faced the reality of the situation. Time was running out. Morning was approaching. Iranian reinforcements could arrive at any moment, and directly in front of them was the equipment they came to destroy, still active, still powered, still performing its mission. Then a young corporal stepped forward. His name was James Holloway. He was 22 years old and came from a small town in Tennessee that most people had never heard of. Before joining the Marines, he had spent 2 years working at his uncle's electrical repair shop. He repaired toasters. He repaired radios. He had repaired old electrical systems. He understood wiring. He understood what could happen when the wrong connection was broken. Holloway studied the equipment racks in front of him. Behind the electronic systems were thick groups of cables running upward through the ceiling toward the antenna arrays on the roof. Those cables were the connection keeping the jamming system alive. If they were cut, the weapon would stop. He pulled out his combat knife. His sergeant immediately grabbed his arm. Those cables could carry dangerous levels of electrical current. One mistake could kill him. Holloway looked at his sergeant. Then he pulled his arm away and started working. The first cable had thick rubber insulation surrounding it. He forced the blade through the material with 4 powerful cuts. Sparks jumped from the damaged line. Then came the second cable, then the third, then the fourth. His hands began to shake, not because he was afraid, but because of the physical force required to cut through heavy industrial wiring. When he reached the 5th cable, the screens inside the room began to flicker. When he cut the 6th, everything changed. The displays went black, the warning lights disappeared. The mechanical noise faded away. Silence filled the room. 3,000 meters away, on the bridge of an American destroyer in the Strait of Hormuz, a navigation officer looked at his display. The GPS connection had returned. The coordinates were correct. The radar information was accurate. He turned toward the captain. "Sir, navigation is back." The captain did not need an explanation. He simply acknowledged the report and ordered the ship to continue normal movement. Across the Strait of Hormuz, American vessels began operating normally again. Systems that had been unreliable for weeks suddenly functioned exactly as intended. Sailors checked their equipment repeatedly, making sure they were seeing the correct information. The signals were clean. The data was accurate. Everything was working. They never knew that a young corporal had restored the situation by cutting 6 cables with a knife. Holloway stood back up. His hands were bleeding after being cut by sharp pieces of metal from the damaged cable shielding. His sergeant looked at the dark equipment screens. Then he looked at Holloway. "That was good work, Marine. Nothing more needed to be said." The extraction happened quickly. The Marines moved back up the stairs toward the rooftop. The Ospreys returned through the darkness, one after another. The wounded were carried aboard first by their fellow Marines. Then the remaining team members followed. The final Marine counted everyone. Every person was accounted for. He climbed inside. The ramps closed. The Ospreys rotated their engines forward and accelerated into the dark sky. Below them, Lark Island disappeared into the night. The facility remained silent on the rocky ground. No signal, no interference, no weapon. But the mission was not as simple as it appeared. Colonel Shirazi was not inside the facility when the Marines attacked. Hours before the raid began, he had left the island by a small boat. From the water, he watched through binoculars as the Ospreys arrived. He heard gunfire crossing the distance. He watched the lights inside the building disappear. And then he did something unexpected. He smiled. 6 months earlier, Colonel Shirazi had ordered his engineers to create a backup system, a second jamming installation. It was hidden inside another building on a different section of the island. It was smaller, but it could still operate. Shirazi believed the Americans would eventually target the primary facility. He had prepared for that possibility. The backup system was his protection plan. If the main facility failed, the secondary system would automatically begin operating. But the backup never activated. Not that night. Not at any time afterward. Because 3 days before the Marines ever entered the Ospreys, an American signals intelligence team discovered something unusual. The electricity usage patterns on Lark Island did not match the activity of only one facility. There was a small additional power demand. It was a minor detail, something that could easily have been ignored. But someone noticed. Someone asked the right question. And a quiet order was issued. A United States Navy dive team was sent into the waters near Lark Island. They found an underwater power cable connecting the Iranian mainland to the backup facility. Without firing a single shot, they cut the cable. They did it 2 full days before the Marine assault began. The backup system was already disabled before it ever had the opportunity to operate. That night, Colonel Shirazi waited in his boat. It would take hours before he discovered what had happened. His emergency system had already been destroyed, silently removed beneath the dark water by American divers. The operation started in darkness. It ended in darkness. That is how missions like this work. They are not carried out for recognition. They happen because someone has to protect sailors they will never meet. Ships continue moving because someone, somewhere, prevented failure before it happened. The following morning, every American warship passed through safely. The sailors aboard those ships woke up, checked their instruments, completed their duties, and returned home. They never knew about the operation. They never knew about the severed cables. They never knew about the young man from Tennessee who solved a problem that had the potential to create a crisis, and that was exactly the point. The most important victories are often the ones nobody sees. Threats removed before the public ever knows they existed. Dangers eliminated because people had the determination to act. A group of planners, intelligence analysts, divers, and Marines worked together. Most of their names would never become known, but their actions mattered. They dismantled a system designed to interfere with the most powerful navy in the world. They completed the mission with discipline and precision. True courage is often found where there are no cameras and no headlines. If you found this story interesting, share your thoughts and let others hear about the people who carry out missions away from the spotlight. These are the stories of real operations, difficult decisions, and the sacrifices made when nobody's watching.